All right, anatomy and physiology. We are on to our last section of anatomy and physiology 1. So we are going to be talking about the senses. And really, it kind of comes down to two main questions that we're looking at here. So overall, what are the senses doing? And then really, how are the special senses, so those ones that have their own organs, different, and how do they let us actually bring in some of that information about our surroundings? So some general concepts we're going to see. We're going to be talking a lot about receptors and sense organs, and really all these follow a pretty similar pattern. Not that I need you to know this exactly for this test. We'll talk more about what the thalamus is and some of these different cortical areas in AMP2, but most of these nerve impulses follow a similar pattern of transmission. You have the particular sense organ, it's going to take it back to the central nervous system. Most senses, with the exception of smell, are going to travel through the thalamus, which is kind of a like a sorting area of the brain, and then it's going to determine which particular cortical area it goes to of the brain, so what part of that cerebrum it's going to go to. And then finally, we're going to have that part determining what we should be doing about it. And really what a lot of times the receptors are doing is taking some type of stimulus, be it an odor, be it a pressure, and converting that into an electrical or nerve impulse type of signal. So our receptors, these are going to be kind of the key things with the senses. These are what actually respond to the stimulus. They are going to take whatever that sensory input is, be it temperature, pressure, and convert that into some type of nerve impulse. Depending on what type of sense we're talking about, these can be very simple, kind of bare nerve endings, to very complex sense organs like the eye or the cochlea. So it really depends on what we're talking about when it comes to these different types of receptors. Stimuli, these are going to be a lot of different types of things. This is what is being detected by these receptors. Some can be things that are pleasurable, like taste, something that's good. Sometimes it may be something dangerous, so detecting something that's hot. And other things, we might be just kind of doing a moment-to-moment measurement of, let's say, the air temperature, your blood carbon dioxide levels. These are all things that can be a stimulus. Some of these we'll see we're consciously aware of. Some of these we have no idea that the body's measuring them, but it is actually doing that. Sensation, these are the ones that we are going to have conscious awareness of. So we are aware of what's going on. So the temperature of your surrounding environment, that somebody touched you on the shoulder, these would be sensations. We are consciously aware of them. These are the stimuluses that get up to that cerebral cortex and we are aware of. Again, we at any particular time are very much only aware of a small fraction of these. Really, to be aware of all your stimuli all at once, or even just the ones that can be consciously aware of, would be somewhat overwhelming. But there is also going to be a lot of different things that we are sensing that we never have conscious awareness of. So things like pressure of the blood, your oxygen levels in the blood, your carbon dioxide levels in the blood acidity or alkalinity. These are things that we actually do measure with sensory things here, but we don't have any awareness of it. And a lot of these ones that we aren't aware of go to lower areas of the brain, things like the medulla and some of that brainstem, and we are going to regulate these without us being actually aware of it whatsoever. So one of the things that we are going to differentiate between is these idea of somatic versus special senses. Somatic senses are these ones that are found throughout the body, where special senses are going to be those that have their own specific sense organ. Again, sensory receptors are specialized cells in some cases, sometimes just nerve endings, could be multicellular structures, but these are going to generate a nerve impulse to send through a neuron back to the brain through those afferent fibers or those sensory fibers. And really what these are is they're transducers. They're taking one form of energy and converting it to another. So like with the eye, they're converting light energy or photons into a nerve impulse. In terms of the ear, it's vibrations into a nerve impulse that is going to get sent back to the brain. So all these different types of energy getting converted to an electrical signal, which we can send back to the brain and then really kind of process what that information means. A lot of these receptors are very similar to what we've talked about in a lot of things here. They have some type of membrane potential, and there's going to be something that brings about a change in that membrane potential, which will usually lead to an action potential being sent along a nerve. So a lot of times these gated channels will open in response to a stimulus and bring about some type of change. Depending on what type of sense we're talking about, we do have different receptive fields. So the distribution of these receptors, so like for pressure receptors, we have a receptive field. You have receptors throughout here. Generally, the more dense this receptor field is, the more we can actually identify or pinpoint where that sense is coming from. So like with the fingers, we have very good receptive field. The receptive fields are very, very small, meaning there's a lot of them on the fingertips. And if you touch a pin to the end of the fingertip, for example, you can really get that precise location. Where other areas, it's going to be a much broader field where we don't have as much, and those receptor fields are larger, and because of that, it's harder to pinpoint where the sensation might be coming from. Sorry. So this kind of gives you the idea of these small receptor fields versus large ones. Something here, this can be very pinpoint if there's another receptor field right next to it, which means we can differentiate this one from the other one. So in reality, we could say we have a better, what's the word it's kind of like with the TVs and the pixels, better resolution. We have much better resolution with these smaller receptive fields. Large receptive fields are going to give us a much worse resolution. We can't see as much as to what's going on. The other thing we'll see with different receptors is there is certain receptors that are continuously responding to stimuli. So like with your ear and your static equilibrium, it's basically sending a signal all the time. If you tilt your head forward, that firing frequency is going to change. It might be more, it might be less. If you tilt your head backwards, it goes in the opposite direction. That is the idea of these tonic receptors that are sensitivity is pretty consistent, and it's always sending a message, and that frequency may increase or decrease depending on what's happening with the stimulus. We also have what are called phasic receptors, which is a lot more of the receptors of the body. These ones are responding to a new stimulus or a change in the stimulus, and these ones tend to undergo sensory adaptation. So if you're getting a consistent, same level stimulus, the sensitivity is going to tend to go down in these ones. So like touch receptor in the skin. Right now, this is sending no message. I touch my hand here, it starts sending a message. If I was to just keep something touching it indefinitely, sooner or later that sensitivity would go down and I wouldn't realize that there was anything on there any longer. So that's that idea of sensory adaptation. And most of these phasic receptors are going to be able to undergo that. If you look at the tonic versus the phasic receptors, you can kind of see here, the tonic receptor is continually monitoring the stimulus, where here it is a response to a unique stimulus. Which over time, if this keeps coming, the actual level of that will drop, the actual level of response. When we can also start classifying these based on where we might be seeing these receptors. So we have three main criteria when we talk about receptor classifications in terms of kind of what they're doing. So general sense receptors, again, throughout the body, rather simple on a lot of these ones, but these are going to be your pressure receptors, your temperature receptors located and found in the skin, pain receptors, for example, as well. Within these general sense ones, we have what we call somatic sensory. These are ones that we are consciously aware of, so things that would detect pressure, vibration, pain. We have visceral receptors that will also respond to these things, but again, we don't have necessarily that conscious awareness of it, and our ability to pinpoint that a lot of times is not as good. The other thing we can talk about is special sense receptors. So these are ones that are pretty much all localized within the head, but these ones have their own specialized complex organs for that particular type of sensation. So things like taste buds with gustation, your olfactory areas for the sense of smell, your eyes with vision, hearing, and equilibrium are both found in the ear, inner ear, for example. But these ones have their own special sense organ that is doing that particular type of stimulus reading. Another way we can look at these is basically where the stimulus is coming from. Are these detecting external stimuli? Those are what we refer to as exteroceptors. These are ones that are found in the skin, as well as special senses. but these are monitoring stimuli that come from outside of the body, where interoceptors, these are be monitoring things found within the body, so stretch receptors within the body. Temperature, CO2 levels are all things that we could talk about with that within the body. Another one here is these proprioceptors. This isn't really stimulus found within the body or outside the body, but it's more of position of the body. So proprioceptors or propioceptors, these are actually kind of body position. How contracted is that muscle? Where is my limb relative to the rest of my body? That's what a proprioceptor is measuring. And then finally, we can look at these based on modality or type of stimulus. So chemoreceptors, these are monitoring chemical levels within the body. So things like carbon dioxide or oxygen within the blood, chemicals that would be for taste or smell. We can talk about thermoreceptors, obviously dealing with changes in temperature. Photoreceptors, light changes, intensity changes, color changes. Mechanoreceptors, these are going to be things that are pressure or vibration. So a lot of our touch receptors on the skin, as well as our hearing and vestibular senses, are dealing with a lot of these vibrations. And then finally, baroreceptors, these are pressure changes, looking at pressures within the blood vessels and things along those lines. And the last one here, the nociceptor, these are pain receptors. They can be somatic as well as visceral. Somatic, much more pinpoint, better localization of that one. Visceral ones, not as much so. And those ones a lot of times will respond to things like oxygen deprivation, which your somatic ones will not. But that gives you an idea of some of these different modalities of stimulus. Generally, when you're going to have a receptor respond to something, you're going to stimulate the receptor. It's going to get a local change. Some type of graded potential is going to reflect that. If it reaches threshold, it is going to trigger a neuron to send an action potential back to the central nervous system, and then the central nervous system is going to take that information and determine what it should be doing. Again, most of these phasic receptors can undergo sensory adaptation. If you've ever been in a room where somebody comes in and is wearing way too much cologne, at first it's almost overpowering and then it kind of tends to go away. It's not that the stimulus has went away, it's just that your response to that stimulus is no longer at the same level. You've sensory adapted to that. And again, most of our sensory receptors, these phasic ones, can undergo sensory adaptation. Even our vision senses do. You just are always doing small micro movements, so you don't realize it. The only phasic receptors that tend not to sensory adapt are actually pain receptors. So they don't sensory adapt, and again, because it's the body's way of saying something is wrong or don't do that any longer, which is why those will not sensory adapt. And again, you can see the somatic senses of those different types that we've talked about here, those different three groups that we talked about. So what we'll be looking at as we go through the rest of these is we're going to first walk through some of our different types of general senses, and then we'll start going through kind of special sense by special sense as to what's going on with those. So I will be back to talk about those.